The long-awaited Fontaine release is nearly here. I know many of you are excited, and Lyney will be our first official 5-star character for the new update. How's it going, everyone? This is Kay, and I'll break down all featured 5-star units for the 4.0 banners. As always, I'll talk about their strengths, weaknesses, and rank them all to determine who you should prioritize. Starting with Lyney, he's a charged level 2 bow DPS character who specializes in pyro mono teams, so consider whether or not you like that type of playstyle similar to Ganyu and Tighnari before you pull. Some may find it boring, some love it. When using his level 2 charge shot, Lyney will fire an attack known as a prop arrow that will deal higher damage, and when the attack hits, it will create a Green Malkin hat which will taunt enemies. Whenever Lyney fires a prop arrow, if his HP is over 60%, then about 20% of his max HP will be drained and he'll gain a prop surplus stack. The health drain from his prop arrows will never drop below 60%, so there's no need to worry about him dying from this, and the max amount of surplus stacks you can have is 5. The stacks are meant to enhance his E skill, but first, Fontaine characters will introduce the new arc abilities for Lyney specifically. At certain intervals, when firing off his prop arrows, it can trigger an attack that deals damage. That specific attack is categorized as Pneuma, and it's going to be an entirely new mechanic that's going to be introduced in Fontaine. But going back to his Malkin hat, as mentioned, it will taunt enemies and gain a certain percentage of Lyney's max HP as health. The duration of the hat is 4 seconds, and since you'll be shooting his prop arrows constantly, you'll always recreate the Malkin hat. Now, whenever the hat disappears, either by being destroyed or its duration is up, it fires a homing missile of sorts called Pyrotechnic Strike that hits an enemy. Unfortunately, only one hat can be active at a time unless you get him at C1, which allows 2 hats to exist on the field. Lyney's E skill consumes all surplus stacks to deal AoE pyro damage. As said before, the more stacks you have, the higher the damage. It'll heal him and also detonates all Malkin hats that's on the field, dealing damage as well. His elemental burst transforms himself to a cat, which you can move around in, and it will only hit enemies once when you make contact with them. When his burst ends, it will explode, dealing damage, and summons a Malkin hat in his place. Lyney will also gain 1 surplus stack. Because of how his talents are set up, you'll use his E skill last, so within your rotation, you would perform your usual support setup, then you'll switch into Lyney and perform some charge attacks, activate his burst to gain that extra stack, and blow everything up with his skill. Now, what makes Lyney a powerhouse would be his A4 passive. When dealing damage to enemies affected with Pyro, Lyney's base attack is increased by 60%, and by having additional Pyro characters, the boost is further increased by 20% for each unit, with a max buff of 100%. This means you need 2 other Pyro characters, so not including Lyney, to maximize his A4 buff. This is the main reason why you want to use a mono pyro team with him, typically with a Anemo support. Most notable teams right now are Xiangling, Bennett, and Kazuha, but of course there are others. This would mean Lyney isn't a reaction-focused character since enemies need to be infused with pyro for his A4. Additionally, for his A1 passive, whenever Lyney drains his HP when using his prop arrows, the Malkin hat summoned upon hitting enemies will restore 3 energy and increase its damage by 80% of his attack. Obviously, more post-testing needs to be done, but Lyney is turning out to be a big numbers damage dealer, especially at higher constellation. C2 specifically grants him a special stack every 2 seconds he is on the field, and it will increase his crit damage by 20% when reaching 3 stacks. Moving on to Yelan, she is a sub DPS Hydro enabler who scales with HP stats. If you're familiar with Xingqiu, she functions similarly in which her burst will be her main strength, allowing you to easily trigger Hydro reactions. Like Xingqiu, she fits into almost the same teams as him, working well in Vape comps, Freeze teams, the various types of Bloom teams, and many others. Hydro is one of the best elements in Genshin Impact, and safe to say, Yelan is a top tier Hydro unit. You can even use her skill as a means to travel as well, which is very convenient within the open world. Yelan also benefits greatly from Hydro Resonance, since the more HP, the higher her damage, which is why a lot of players like using her with Xingqiu together. Now, just a quick breakdown between the 2 differences. Xingqiu offers more utility like healing and slight resistance, which is great for characters that gets easily interrupted, like Yoimiya for example. Yelan, on the other hand, focuses more on damage, and thanks to her A4 passive, it increases your active character's damage as time goes on whenever her burst remains active. Make sure to have a lot of ER on her, because without her burst, Yelan's contribution severely drops, so having her burst ready every rotation is absolutely necessary. Thankfully, her equipments are pretty straightforward. Weapon specifically is quite free to play friendly, as the Favonius bow is one of her best. Emblem artifacts are also her best, which you should have plenty by now since it's considered one of the best artifacts to farm for. Now, despite being more so an off-field DPS character, Yelan's breakthrough charge shots and E skill can hit pretty hard. It's just that the downtime for the skills makes it slow in battle at lower constellations. Yelan is a phenomenal character, and as Hydro continues being a strong gameplay mechanic, Yelan is quite future-proof. Zhongli is the best shielder you'll ever have. His shield can tank a lot of damage when building him with pure HP stats. What makes him great is that his shield comes from his E skill and has 100% uptime. The Jade shield lasts for 20 seconds and on a 12-second cooldown, allowing you to go through your rotations and swap back to him whenever you need to reapply it. Shielding in general is a very reliable mechanic in the game. For one, you won't need healers since you're not taking damage, unless you're hit with DOT attacks, then that's another story. But the best thing about shields is that it prevents interruptions. Teams can lose out on overall damage if the main on-field DPS character gets staggered frequently. With shields, especially one from Zhongli, it prevents your characters from interruptions, so you can focus strictly on attacking enemies without worrying about dodging or getting knocked back, which can save you a lot of time in Abyss. One of Zhongli's weaknesses would be his personal damage being quite low. Most of his damage will come from his burst, and it does have a long animation time. He's obviously a defensive character, but despite having low damage though, his usage in Abyss continues to remain high thanks to how convenient his shielding is, and he can shred 20% elemental and physical resistance on enemies, which is great for the team's damage. Regarding his Geo Pillars, certain enemies or bosses can easily destroy it, but it provides a nice little consistent damage that can also block some projectiles. The Melolith artifacts adds additional team support, but with only one Geo structure, it can be unreliable if you fight outside the pillar's AoE range. That's why having him at C1 is highly recommended, since he can have two Geo Pillars at the same time. Another weakness is that Zhongli doesn't really contribute towards elemental reactions. Geo reactions in general aren't considered strong at this stage of the game, so unlike many other supports, he doesn't add value for reaction-focused teams. Most players will either use him as a shield bot or a burst support, which is a hybrid that focuses on some HP but mainly increasing his burst damage. The petrification from his burst can be quite handy when trying to stop enemies from moving around. Now the thing is, Zhongli may be boring to use, but thanks to him, a lot of Genshin Impact players develop bad dodging habits thanks to this guy, which just shows how great his shielding is. Childe is the fastest Hydro enabler in the game, but unlike most enablers, he's required to be on the field. There's a misconception that Childe is the main DPS of the team. He can certainly be one within the right team and build, but he's usually the one who enables reactions for off-field sub-DPS characters. His normal attacks and Riptides apply a lot of Hydro within a short time frame. As an example, in the international team, Childe is the enabler as he inflicts Hydro to enemies, and then the big numbers come from Xiangling's burst damage, causing a reverse vape. Childe's Hydro application has good AoE, which makes it very reliable for applying Hydro to surrounding enemies. His personal normal attack damage is considered low when comparing to other DPSs, but his burst can deal significant damage. Now, Childe is somewhat a technical character. You have to know when to trigger the right attacks at the right moment. Going back to the Childe International example, he's the one who's helping Xiangling trigger reverse vape. But for his burst, you want Xiangling to enable Pyro on enemies for Childe to trigger the reaction for higher burst vape damage. A lot of players use hyper carries with supports and sub DPSs to strengthen the on-field damage dealer. Childe is the reverse, in which he's on-field to help off-field damage dealers. This does depend on your team, of course. For freeze teams, Childe will typically be your main DPSs, while cryo units will act as the enabler. The biggest issue you'll encounter is Childe's skill cooldown. The longer you're in his melee stance, the longer the cooldown will be, which will affect your rotations. It takes a little practice, but you usually want to end it within 10 seconds or so at C0. It can cause some inconveniences if everyone other than Childe is ready to attack, but if you get used to the strict rotations, he's a very fun and strong character to use. So who should you pull for? And this recommendation is for C0, since that's the most realistic for most players. Number one priority should be Yelan, even if you do have a C6 Xingqiu. They are similar, yet they offer different support. Also, keep in mind Abyss requires two teams, so having two top-tier Hydro enablers is beneficial, and as stated before, She and Xingqiu have great synergy together when placed in the same team. She is regarded as one of the best Hydro sub-DPSs and has plenty of team flexibility and is free-to-play friendly in terms of builds. Her excellent Hydro application and damage buff makes her viable in max starring Spiral Abyss. Ever since her release, Yelan has remained on top of the charts for Abyss usage. Outside of Abyss or battles, her skill makes traveling easier and quicker thanks to her skill. Now, is Yelan a must-pull, meaning you should sacrifice everything for her? Of course not. If, for example, you find it difficult to stay alive for boss battles, and having a shielder like Zhongli will help you a lot more, then go for whoever benefits you specifically. But I will say, out of the 4.0 characters, Yelan should be the top priority as her Hydro application can help all players. Speaking about Zhongli, he's yet another amazing character you should consider getting if you don't have him yet, especially if you're new. His shield will practically make you immortal. This will allow you to clear hard content and beat tough bosses. His shield is so beneficial for all battles, even time battles, as it'll prevent interruptions. The fact you don't ever need to worry about dying just shows how broken he can be. Now, Genshin Impact at this stage is primarily a damage-focused game. The goal is to kill all enemies as fast as possible, so not everyone will need a strong defensive unit like Zhongli. Yes, he can shred resistance, which is helpful, but Geo being a weak reaction and his personal damage not being high will mean players may want other characters that can offer higher offensive support. Regardless, the safety Zhongli offers can be extremely beneficial for all players, especially for those who are more casual when playing Genshin Impact and may not want to min-max everything. If you aren't going for Yelan, then I would suggest you trying to get Zhongli. For the final two, we just don't know how strong and viable Lyney will be as of yet. Leaked gameplay footage shows insane damage numbers, but keep in mind there are a lot of factors that affect damage, like his constellations, weapons, and artifacts. So between Lyney and Childe, it really depends on what you're after. Childe has proven to be very viable across many updates even now. Childe International remains being a strong team that players still use even on recent Abyss. His on-field Hydro application is second to none, but a downside would be, unlike other Hydro enablers who can apply Hydro off-field like Yelan and Ayato, Childe needs to be on the field, which may affect some team builds. Since his Hydro application is so fast, some supports won't be able to enable him for reactions, but the combination between his decent damage and him being a great on-field enabler for the team, on top of being technical to use, makes him a fun character who can clear endgame content. Now for Lyney, players that love to see big numbers will enjoy using him. He doesn't have team flexibility as of right now if you want to fully utilize his A4 passive, but hopefully we'll get future Pyro supports. An important thing to consider is if you enjoy his playstyle or not, because not everyone will. Whether or not he'll be broken in the game remains to be seen, since he's obviously not out yet. There's a lot of things that still needs to be properly tested, such as realistic damage output for casual players, different team builds, and possibly test reaction teams with him, because you never know. So to summarize real quickly, Yelan should be your first priority. If you don't want or need her, then Zhongli should be next. Between Childe and Lyney, it will depend on how Lyney will perform after release. Go for Childe on the safe side since we have numerous data on him already. Lyney is going to hit like a truck, but his team will be very restrictive and we may or may not obtain future supports that can make him even better. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for future Genshin Impact videos. Good luck on your pose, everyone. Till next time.